I held the scalpel steady against his skin, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing too late that saving the life of the city's most dangerous man was the one mistake I could never walk away from. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy intense romance stories with a twist, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments. What do you think happens next? Now let's get into the story. Part 1: The Devil Wears a Kevlar Vest. I never planned to work for the underworld. In fact, my plan was simple. Finish my medical residency, pay off my crippling student loans, and disappear into a quiet life as a general practitioner in some sleepy town where the biggest emergency was a cat stuck in a tree. But life has a funny way of laughing at your plans, especially when you're desperate. I'm Dr. Elias Thorne. At 29, I was top of my class, a prodigy with a scalpel, and completely broke. That's how I ended up here, standing in the opulent, marble-floored foyer of the grandest estate in the city, shaking hands with Julian Vane. Julian was everything the tabloids said he was: young, obscenely wealthy, and arrogant enough to rival a Greek god. He was the CEO of Vane Enterprises, a shipping conglomerate that everyone knew was just a front for things that didn't appear on any tax return. "Dr. Thorne," Julian said, his voice smooth like expensive whiskey. He didn't look at my face. He was too busy checking his reflection in the glass of a framed painting. "You come highly recommended. Discretion is your specialty, I hear." "It's part of the oath," I replied, keeping my tone professional. My palms were sweating, but I kept them clasped behind my back. "But I was told this was a private residency position for an elderly relative." Julian laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "My grandmother needs her blood pressure checked, yes. But let's be real, Elias. You're here because sometimes people in my circle get hurt, and hospitals ask too many questions. You're here to fix things quietly." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. "And one more thing. My fiancée, Clara. She's living here too." I blinked. "Okay, don't get any ideas," Julian snapped, his eyes suddenly cold. "I know how you doctors are. God complex. Thinking you can charm anyone. Clara is off limits. You look at her too long, you're fired. You speak to her without permission, you're fired. Do we understand each other?" I stared at him for a long second, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. This was the third time in 10 minutes he'd mentioned his fiancée. "Mr. Vane," I said, my voice deadpan. "With all due respect, I'm sure Clara is lovely. But unless she's a 60-year-old man with a beard and a penchant for vintage motorcycles, she's not my type." Julian froze. "Excuse me?" "I'm gay," I said, shrugging. "And I have a boyfriend. Well, an imaginary one, because I work 80 hours a week, but the point stands. Your fiancé is safe." The tension in Julian's shoulders evaporated instantly. He actually looked relieved, which was almost insulting. "Oh, well, that simplifies things. Welcome to the team, Dr. Thorne. Your quarters are in the East Wing. Don't go into the West Wing unless summoned. That's Silas's territory." "Silas. My head of security. My partner. Just stay out of his way. He doesn't like strangers, and he definitely doesn't like doctors." That was the first time I heard his name. Silas. A name that would soon haunt my every waking thought. The first 2 weeks were boringly normal. I checked Julian's grandmother's vitals, I prescribed sleeping pills for Julian's stressed-out assistant, and I avoided the West Wing like it was radioactive. I saw Clara once, a beautiful, bored-looking woman who spent her days by the pool. I waved, she nodded, and that was the extent of our torrid affair. Then came the storm. It was a Tuesday night, raining so hard the drops sounded like bullets against the window pane of my bedroom. I was reading a medical journal, trying to ignore the loneliness that always crept in around midnight when my phone buzzed. It wasn't the usual ringtone. It was the emergency line Julian had installed. "Come to the library. Now. Bring the full kit." The line went dead. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the trauma bag I kept packed by the door and ran. The house was dark, shadows stretching long and twisted across the hallway walls. The thunder rattled the windows, masking the sound of my footsteps as I sprinted toward the main library. When I burst through the double oak doors, the smell hit me first. Copper. Iron. Blood. Julian was pacing by the fireplace, his face pale, his hair a mess. But he wasn't the one bleeding. Lying on the leather sofa was a mountain of a man. He was dressed in tactical black gear, but the fabric was torn at the shoulder and the abdomen. He was soaked to the bone, rain and blood mixing on the expensive leather. "Fix him," Julian ordered, his voice cracking. Don't call an ambulance. Just fix him. I rushed to the sofa, dropping to my knees. The man, Silas, I assumed, was conscious. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent. He was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. "Can you hear me?" I asked, snapping on a pair of gloves. "I'm the doctor. I'm going to check your wounds." Silas turned his head slowly. His gaze locked onto mine, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "I don't need a doctor," he rasped, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "I need a whiskey. You need a blood transfusion if you don't shut up and let me work." I snapped back, cutting open his shirt with trauma shears. The damage was bad. A deep laceration across the abdomen, knife wound likely, and a gunshot graze on his shoulder. He was losing blood fast. "Julian, hold the light," I commanded. The CEO obeyed instantly, his arrogance gone in the face of real violence. "This is going to hurt," I told Silas, preparing a needle for a local anesthetic. "Don't," Silas gritted out, his hand shooting out to grab my wrist. His grip was iron-strong, despite the blood loss. "No drugs. I need to stay sharp." "You're going into shock," I argued, trying to pull my wrist free. "If I stitch you up without numbing it, you'll pass out from the pain." "Try me," he challenged. His eyes were intense, burning with a feverish light. "Just sew it up, document unless you don't have the stomach for it." It was a challenge. A stupid, masculine, dangerous challenge. And God help me, I took it. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "But if you scream, I'm charging extra." I worked for an hour. The room was silent except for the rain, the snap of my instruments, and Silas's ragged breathing. He didn't scream. He didn't even whimper. He just watched me. Every time I looked up, those gray eyes were fixed on my face, analyzing, dissecting. It was unnerving. It was intimate in a way that felt illicit. When I tied off the last stitch on his abdomen, my own hands were trembling from the adrenaline. I cleaned the wounds, bandaged him tightly, and finally sat back on my heels, wiping sweat from my forehead. "You're lucky," I said, stripping off my bloody gloves. "Another inch to the left, and you'd be dead." Silas sat up slowly, wincing but hiding it well. He looked down at my handiwork, then back at me. "Clean stitches. You've done this before." "Emergency room rotation in Chicago," I said. "I've seen worse." Julian stepped forward, looking like he might vomit. "Is he okay? Will he recover?" "He needs rest," I said, standing up and feeling my knees pop. "Fluids, antibiotics, and absolutely no fighting ninja assassins for at least 2 weeks." Silas let out a huff of air that might have been a laugh. He tried to stand, but swayed. I caught him instinctively, my hands gripping his bare arms. His skin was burning hot. "Easy, Tiger," I murmured. I wasn't joking. You lost a lot of blood. For a moment, we were pressed together. He was massive, towering over me even while injured. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the raw power coiled in his muscles. "I've got him," Julian said, rushing to take Silas's other side. Silas pulled away from me, perhaps a bit too quickly. "I'm fine," he growled. He looked at me one last time, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Elias," I said. "Elias," he repeated, testing the word on his tongue. "You have steady hands, Elias. For a man who looks like he's about to faint." "I'm not going to faint," I lied. "Go to bed, Doc," Silas said, turning away. "And forget you saw this." Julian helped him out of the room, leaving me alone in the library with the smell of blood and rain. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sofa. My heart was still racing, not from fear anymore, but from something else entirely. I went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those gray eyes staring at me. The next morning, I expected silence. I expected to be ignored. Instead, I found a small package outside my bedroom door. No note, no name, just a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was a vintage, silver scalpel, beautifully engraved, expensive, and wrapped around the handle was a piece of paper with a single sentence scrawled in rough handwriting. "You didn't faint. S." I touched the cold metal, a shiver running down my spine. This wasn't just a thank you gift. It was an invitation, or maybe a warning. I was supposed to stay away from the West Wing. I was supposed to keep my head down and collect my paycheck. But as I held that silver blade, I knew I was already in too deep. Because the most dangerous man in the city had just noticed me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to run away. I wanted to see what happened when the storm finally broke. End of part 1. Part 2: The Beast in the West Wing. The scalpel lay on my bedside table like a silent accusation. For 3 days, I hadn't seen him. I hadn't seen Julian either, which was a blessing, but the silence from the West Wing was deafening. Every time I walked down the main corridor, my eyes drifted to the heavy double doors that separated the civilized part of the estate from Silas's territory. I was supposed to be a doctor. My job was to heal, to monitor, to ensure recovery. But Julian had made it clear, don't go into the West Wing unless summoned. But I was also stubborn, and I knew wounds like the one Silas had sustained didn't just heal with a single night of stitching. They needed cleaning, they needed monitoring for infection, and they definitely didn't need neglect. By the fourth night, my conscience won over my fear of unemployment. I grabbed my medical kit, took a deep breath, and walked toward the forbidden doors. The West Wing felt different. The air was cooler here, the lighting dimmer. The plush carpets of the main house were replaced by hardwood floors that creaked under my footsteps. There were no paintings of ancestors on the walls, only shadows. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress. I found him in what looked like a converted gym. The room was vast, filled with heavy bags, weights, and sparring mats. The only light came from the moon filtering through the high windows and a single lamp in the corner. Silas was there, and he was doing exactly what I had told him not to do. He was shirtless, sweat glistening on his skin, hanging from a pull-up bar. His back muscles rippled with every movement, a map of old scars and fresh bruises. The bandage around his abdomen was dark, too dark. He was bleeding through. Are you insane? My voice echoed in the empty room. Silas dropped from the bar, landing lightly on his feet despite the injury. He didn't look surprised to see me. He turned slowly, wiping his face with a towel, his gray eyes locking onto mine with that same unnerving intensity. You're lost, Doc, he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered, maybe from pain, maybe from exertion. Julian told you the rules. I don't care about Julian's rules, I snapped, marching toward him. Anger flared in my chest, masking the sudden dryness in my throat caused by seeing him half-naked. I care about my stitches, which you are currently ripping open. I reached him and pointed a finger at his chest. Sit down. Now. Silas looked at my finger, then up at my face. A corner of his mouth twitched. You give a lot of orders for someone who's technically trespassing. And you bleed a lot for someone who claims to be tough, I countered. Sit, or I sedate you and drag you to a bed myself. He chuckled, a low, dark sound that vibrated through the floorboards. But he sat on the edge of a weight bench. I knelt between his spread knees, trying to ignore the intimacy of the position. I opened my kit, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled out fresh gauze and antiseptic. Lift your arm, I commanded. He obeyed. As I peeled back the blood-soaked bandage, I hissed. The wound was angry, red around the edges, and definitely pulled. You tore 2 stitches. Congratulations. If you keep this up, you'll get an infection that goes septic, and then you'll die. Is that the plan? The plan is to be ready, Silas said quietly. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was looking at the top of my head. Ready for what? I asked, focusing on cleaning the area. My fingers brushed his skin, hot, feverish skin. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me that I prayed he didn't feel. For when they come back, he said. The people who did this. They don't leave loose ends. I paused, the forceps in my hand hovering over his skin. Is that why you gave me the scalpel? Because I'm a loose end now too. Silas went still. His hand moved, lightning fast, catching my chin and forcing me to look up at him. His fingers were calloused, rough against my jaw, but his touch wasn't painful. It was possessive. You saved my life, Elias, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That makes you a target. The scalpel wasn't a gift. It was a reminder. Sharp things are the only friends you have in this world. My heart hammered against my ribs. I should have pulled away. I should have been terrified. But I wasn't. I was mesmerized. I'm a doctor, I whispered back. I save lives. I don't take them. You might have to, he said darkly. His thumb brushed my lower lip, a fleeting touch that made my breath hitch. Then he let go and leaned back. Finish up, document. Before Julian realizes you're missing. I finished in silence. The air between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words and a tension that felt like a pulled rubber band about to snap. I restitched the wound, bandaged him with double layers, and stood up. My legs felt weak. No more exercise, I said, trying to regain my professional composure. Bed rest. At least for 2 days. Please. Silas stood up too, towering over me. I make no promises. I turned to pack my bag, needing to put some distance between us. By the way, I said, keeping my back to him. Julian thinks I have a boyfriend. I told him that so he wouldn't worry about his fiancée. I know, Silas said. I turned back around. You know, I check everyone who enters this house, Silas said, crossing his arms. The movement made his biceps flex, distracting me momentarily. I know your financial records, your student loans, your grades, and I know you've been single for 3 years. Since Chicago. I felt the blood drain from my face. You investigated me? I protect this family, he said simply. But don't worry. Your secret is safe. It's actually useful. Useful how? He took a step closer, invading my personal space again. He smelled of sweat, copper, and something distinctly masculine. It keeps Julian calm. And it keeps everyone else from wondering why the handsome new doctor is sneaking into the West Wing at midnight. I'm not sneaking, I defended weakly. I'm working. Are you? Silas tilted his head, his eyes searching mine. Because most doctors don't look at their patients the way you're looking at me right now. I flushed, heat rising up my neck. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar, he murmured. There was no malice in it, only amusement. Suddenly, the door to the gym creaked open. We both froze. Silas. Julian's voice drifted in from the hallway. Are you in there? Silas didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me, his expression shifting from amusement to something cold and professional in a split second. Go, he whispered. Back door. Behind the punching bags. It leads to the servants' corridor. I'm not running, I whispered back. I was treating a patient. Elias, he said, and the way he said my name, sharp, commanding, made my knees weak again. If Julian finds you here, he'll fire you. And I can't protect you if you're not in the house. Go. I hesitated for 1 second, looking at his bandaged chest, his guarded eyes. Then I grabbed my kit and ran. I slipped into the shadows just as the main door opened. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold brick wall of the hidden corridor, listening. Who were you talking to? Julian asked. No one, Silas replied, his voice flat. Just talking to myself. Pain does that to a man. You shouldn't be training, Julian sighed. Come on. We have a meeting in the morning. A new shipment is coming in. I waited until their footsteps faded away before I exhaled. I made my way back to my room, my heart racing not from the near miss, but from the realization that hit me in the darkness of the hallway. Silas wasn't just a patient. He wasn't just a bodyguard. He was dangerous, he was broken, and he was keeping secrets that could get us both killed. And I was falling for him. I sat on my bed, opening the velvet box again to look at the scalpel. The metal glinted in the moonlight. Sharp things are the only friends you have. I had a feeling I was going to need it, because whatever game Julian and Silas were playing, I had just dealt myself a hand. And in this house, losing didn't mean going broke. It meant bleeding out on a leather sofa while the rain washed away the evidence. End of part 2. Part 3: The Oath in the Crossfire. The estate was a fortress, but silence was its loudest weapon. 2 days had passed since the incident in the gym. 2 days of Julian pacing the hallways like a caged tiger. 2 days of Silas moving through the shadows like a ghost I couldn't quite touch. I tried to focus on my official duties. I checked Julian's grandmother's blood pressure, textbook perfect, organized the inventory in the medical bay, and pretended I wasn't jumping at every creak of the floorboards. But the silver scalpel on my nightstand was a constant reminder. Sharp things are the only friends you have. On the morning of the 3rd day, the summons didn't come from a text message. It came from Silas himself. I was in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee and staring blankly at the rain battering the garden, when the air pressure in the room shifted. I didn't need to turn around to know he was there. The scent of ozone, rain, and gun oil drifted over me before he spoke. Pack your bag, document. I turned slowly. Silas was dressed for war again, tactical black cargo pants, a fitted long-sleeve shirt that did nothing to hide the bulk of his shoulders, and a heavy jacket that definitely concealed a holster. He looked tired, the lines around his gray eyes etched deeper than before, but he stood with that terrifying, unwavering stillness. Good morning to you too, I said, setting my mug down. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. Is someone hurt? Not yet, Silas said grimly. But Julian wants you on the ride-along. Ride-along. I scoffed, crossing my arms. I'm a doctor, Silas, not a mascot. I don't do field trips. It wasn't a request. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that low rumble that vibrated right through the soles of my shoes. We have a meeting at the docks. A handover. Julian is paranoid. He thinks if things go south, having a surgeon on standby in the car is better than calling one after the fact. And what do you think? I asked, looking up at him. Silas held my gaze. For a second, the professional mask slipped. I think you should stay here, lock your door, and read a book. But I don't sign the checks. If I say no, then Julian fires you. And you know what happens to people who know too much and then get fired from vain enterprises. A chill went down my spine. It wasn't a threat from Silas. It was a warning about the world I had stepped into. Fine, I said, grabbing my trauma kit from the counter. But if I get shot, I'm haunting both of you. Silas didn't smile, but his eyes softened just a fraction. Stay behind me, Elias. Always behind me. You do that, and you won't get shot. The drive to the docks was suffocating. We took a black SUV with tinted windows thick enough to stop a bullet. Julian sat in the back with me, tapping furiously on his tablet, while Silas drove. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Dr. Thorne, Julian said without looking up. I trust you brought plenty of morphine. I have a headache. I brought trauma pads and tourniquets, I replied dryly. If you want aspirin, check the glove box. Julian chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Always so sharp. You know, Elias, I did some digging. Your student loans, they're substantial. Almost 200 grand. That's a heavy chain to drag around. I froze. Is there a point to this, Julian? Just that loyalty pays well, he said, finally looking at me with those cold, calculating eyes. Stick with us tonight, keep your head down, and maybe that debt disappears by morning. I looked at the back of Silas's head in the driver's seat. He didn't react, but I saw his knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a leash. We arrived at the shipyard under the cover of a gray, weeping sky. The place was a graveyard of rusted metal. Shipping containers stacked like towering monoliths, cranes looming overhead like skeletal fingers. The smell of salt and diesel was overwhelming. Stay in the car, Silas ordered as he killed the engine. Keep the engine running, lock the doors. If I yell move, you drive. Don't wait for us. I'm not leaving you. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silas paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked back at me, his gaze intense, searching. You leave if I tell you to leave, Elias. That's the job. He got out, flanking Julian as they walked toward a group of men waiting by a blue shipping container. I watched through the rain-streaked windshield, my breath fogging the glass. The meeting seemed civil at first. Julian was talking, gesturing with his hands. The other group, 3 men in heavy coats, were listening. Silas stood a few feet behind Julian, his posture relaxed but ready, like a coiled spring. Then, everything shattered. It happened in slow motion. One of the men from the other group reached into his coat. Not for a lighter, but for a gun. Down! Silas roared. The sound of the gunshot cracked through the air like a whip. The windshield of the SUV shattered in the top corner, spiderwebbing instantly. I ducked, covering my head as adrenaline flooded my system, turning my blood to ice. Outside, chaos erupted. I heard more shots, pop, 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 and shouting. Elias, get down. It was Silas's voice, raw and terrified. I peered over the dashboard. Julian was on the ground, crawling behind a stack of crates. Silas was returning fire, moving with a fluid, lethal grace I had only seen in movies. He was a shield, a wall of black tactical gear standing between his boss and death. But there were too many of them. 2 more SUVs screeched around the corner, flanking them. We need to move, Julian screamed. I saw Silas stumble. Just a slight hitch in his step, but I saw it. His hand went to his side, the side I had stitched up 3 days ago. He's hurt. The realization overrode my fear. It overrode my common sense. I didn't think about the debt, or the danger, or Julian's rules. I thought about gray eyes and the man who had warned me to stay away. I shoved the driver's side door open and scrambled into the front seat. I slammed the car into gear. Get in! I screamed, leaning on the horn. Silas turned, his eyes widening when he saw me behind the wheel. He grabbed Julian by the collar and practically threw him toward the car. Go! Move! They scrambled into the back seat, just as a hail of bullets sparked against the rear fender. I stomped on the gas. The SUV roared, tires spinning on the wet pavement before catching traction. We fishtailed out of the shipyard, metal screaming against metal as we scraped past a container. Drive, Elias. Drive. Julian was yelling, clutching his arm. I drove like a madman. I ran red lights, swerved through traffic, and didn't slow down until the docks were a blur in the rearview mirror. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel, but I didn't stop. Is everyone alive? I shouted, my voice cracking. I'm fine, Julian gasped. Just a graze. My suit is ruined. Silas. I asked, looking in the rearview mirror. Silas was slumped against the window. He was pale, sweating profusely. His hand was pressed tight against his abdomen, and dark blood was seeping between his fingers, staining his tactical vest. Silas. I'm okay, he grunted, but his voice was weak. Just tore a stitch. You didn't tear a stitch, I said, panic rising in my throat. You took a hit. Just drive, Doc, he whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. Get us home. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. We got back to the estate. I didn't wait for Julian's orders. I barked at the security team to carry Silas to the medical bay, not his room. I needed the lights, the equipment. Get out, I told Julian as we laid Silas on the sterile table. Elias, I said get out. I spun on him, my hands covered in Silas's blood. Unless you want to scrub in and hold a retractor, get the hell out of my infirmary. Julian looked at me, shocked by the venom in my voice. He nodded once and backed out of the room. I turned back to Silas. He was conscious, barely. I cut the vest off him, my heart breaking at the sight. It wasn't a direct hit. The Kevlar had stopped the bullet from penetrating deep, but the impact had ripped open the old wound completely, and the blunt force trauma was severe. He was bleeding heavily. Stay with me, I commanded, grabbing the clotting agents. Don't you dare close your eyes, Silas. You drive fast, Silas murmured, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Crazy, doctor. Shut up and save your energy. I worked for 2 hours. I cleaned, I cauterized, I restitched. I pumped him with fluids and antibiotics. Every movement was precise, fueled by a terrifying clarity. I wasn't just fixing a patient. I was fighting for the only thing in this house that felt real. When I finally finished, Silas was stable. He was sleeping, the rhythm of his chest rising and falling steady on the monitor. I collapsed into the chair beside his bed, exhaustion crashing over me like a tidal wave. I buried my face in my hands, trying to scrub away the image of him stumbling in the rain. Elias. The voice was a whisper. I looked up. Silas was watching me. His eyes were heavy, glazed with pain medication, but they were open. I told you to leave, he rasped. And I told you I wasn't leaving you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached out, my fingers brushing the hair back from his damp forehead. You're an idiot. You could have died. Part of the job, he whispered. He turned his hand palm up on the sheet, a silent invitation. I hesitated, then laced my fingers through his. His grip was weak, but warm. Not today, I said fiercely. Not while I'm on shift. Silas squeezed my hand. You did good, document. You did good. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady beep of the monitor. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. Then the door opened. It wasn't Julian. It was Clara, the fiancée. She stood in the doorway, looking perfectly put together in a silk robe, but her face was pale. Is he alive? She asked softly. He's stable, I said, not letting go of Silas's hand. He needs rest. Clara stepped into the room. She looked at Silas, then at our joined hands. She didn't look angry. She looked sad. Julian is waiting for you in the library, Elias, she said. He says it's urgent. I'm not leaving my patient. You have to, Clara said, her voice dropping. He's drinking. And when Julian drinks after a failed deal, he looks for someone to blame. I looked at Silas. He was drifting off again. I squeezed his hand one last time, then stood up. I'll be back, I promised him, though he couldn't hear me. I walked to the library, my bloodstained scrubs a stark contrast to the pristine hallways. I found Julian sitting by the fire, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked up as I entered. The hero returns, he slurred slightly. You saved us tonight, Elias. I underestimated you. I did my job, I said coldly. Now if you don't mind, I need to get back to. Sit down, Julian ordered. The playfulness was gone. I sat. Silas is weak right now, Julian said, swirling his drink. He's compromised. He cares about you. I saw it in the car. He threw me in to save you. He was doing his job, I said, my heart pounding. No, Julian shook his head. Silas protects the asset. I am the asset. You are the help. But tonight he chose you. Julian leaned forward, the firelight casting long shadows on his face. That makes you a liability, Elias. Or, it makes you the perfect leverage. He pulled a folder from the table and slid it across to me. Open it. I opened the folder. Inside were photos. Not of me. Photos of a small house in the suburbs. Photos of an older woman gardening. Photos of a little girl playing on a swing set. My sister. And my niece. I know you don't have a boyfriend, Elias, Julian said softly. But you do have family. And since Silas seems to have lost his objectivity where you're concerned, I need to ensure your loyalty in other ways. I stared at the photos, the world tilting on its axis. The rage that flared in my chest was white-hot, blinding. If you touch them, I whispered, I will kill you. Julian smiled, a shark smelling blood. That's the spirit, Doctor. That's the fire I need. Welcome to the family, Elias. Now, go patch up my bodyguard. We have a lot of work to do. I stood up, clutching the folder. I walked out of the library, my legs numb. I went back to the medical bay, back to the only safe place left in this hell. Silas was still sleeping. I sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. I looked at the scalpel on the tray table, the one he had given me. Sharp things are the only friends you have. I picked it up, feeling the cold steel against my skin. Julian thought he had won. He thought he owned me now. But he had made a mistake. He had shown me exactly what I had to lose. And he had just given me a reason to stop being a healer and start learning how to be a soldier. I looked at Silas's sleeping face and made a silent vow. I would save him. I would save my family. And I would bring this whole damn house down, brick by bloody brick. End of part 3. Part 4: The poison in the veins. The medical bay was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the vitals monitor and the soft sound of rain still falling against the reinforced glass. It should have been peaceful. It should have been a sanctuary. But with the folder containing photos of my sister and niece sitting on the desk just a few feet away, the room felt like a gas chamber. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's smile, that predatory shark-like grin, and heard his threat. Loyalty pays well. Betrayal costs everything. Silas was still asleep, sedated heavily enough to keep a normal man down for a week. But Silas wasn't normal. Even in sleep, his brow was furrowed, his body tense, fighting battles in his dreams. I sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, tracing the line of the bandage that wrapped around his torso. The blood had stopped seeping through, which was a small mercy. I'm sorry, I whispered into the silence. I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. I reached out, my fingers hovering over his hand. I wanted to hold him. I wanted to wake him up and tell him everything. About Julian, about the photos, about the terrifying realization that I was in love with him. But I couldn't. Telling Silas would be a death sentence. He would try to kill Julian, and in his current state, he would fail. And then Julian would make the call, and my family would pay the price. I had to be smarter. I had to be colder. The door hissed open. I didn't jump this time. I just stiffened, pulling my hand back and turning to face the intruder. It was Julian. He was wearing a fresh suit, immaculate and expensive, as if he hadn't been crawling through mud and gunfire 3 hours ago. How is our patient? He asked, stepping into the room. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at me, gauging my reaction. He's stable, I said, my voice flat. But he needs at least 3 days of bed rest. Minimum. Unfortunate, Julian sighed, checking his watch. Because we have a dinner tonight with the suppliers from the docks. They're nervous after the interruption. They want reassurance. Send someone else, I said. Silas can't walk, let alone fight. I'm not asking Silas to fight, Julian said smoothly. I'm taking you. I stared at him. I'm a doctor, Julian. Not a bodyguard. Exactly. You're a civilian. You're harmless. Bringing you shows I'm not expecting trouble. It puts them at ease. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. And it keeps you close where I can see you. You remember our conversation in the library, don't you, Elias? I felt the phantom weight of the folder on the desk. I remember. Good. Be ready in an hour. Or something less bloody. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Oh, and Elias? If Silas asks why you're going, tell him it was your idea. Tell him you wanted to see the city. If he thinks I'm forcing you, he might get agitated. And high blood pressure is bad for recovery, isn't it? He left before I could answer. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. He was isolating me. He was turning me into a liar. Elias. The rough voice came from the bed. I spun around. Silas was awake. His gray eyes were hazy, blinking against the harsh light, but they were focused on me. Hey, I said, forcing my face into a mask of calm I didn't feel. I moved to his side, checking the monitor. You're awake. How's the pain? Manageable, he grunted, trying to sit up. He winced, his breath hitching. Don't, I ordered, putting a hand on his shoulder to push him back down. You tore a muscle wall, Silas. You move, you bleed. Stay down. He stopped fighting, sinking back into the pillows. He looked at me, really looked at me, searching for something. I heard voices. Was that Julian? Yeah, I said, turning away to busy myself with a tray of instruments. Just checking in. What did he want? He invited me to dinner, I lied. The words tasted like ash. With the suppliers. He thinks it's good PR to have the hero doctor there. Silas narrowed his eyes. And you said yes? I said yes, I replied, keeping my back to him. I need to get out of this house for a bit anyway. The air in here is stifling. Elias. The tone of his voice stopped me cold. It wasn't the voice of a patient. It was the voice of the man who had held a gun in a rainstorm. Look at me. I turned slowly. You're a terrible liar, Silas whispered. Your left hand twitches when you do it. I shoved my hand into my pocket. I'm not lying, Silas. I'm just tired. And maybe I want to see what this world is really like. You said it yourself. I saved a life today. Maybe I like the adrenaline. Silas studied me for a long, agonizing moment. He saw through me. I knew he did. But he didn't call me out on it. He just looked sad. Be careful, Elias, he said softly. Julian isn't a friend. He's a collector. And once he puts you on a shelf, he doesn't let you down. I can handle Julian, I said, sounding more confident than I felt. Get some sleep. I'll check on you when I get back. I walked out of the room before my resolve shattered. The dinner was a lavish affair in a private room at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, and men in suits who looked like they would kill you for looking at them wrong. I sat next to Julian, feeling like a prize poodle on display. He introduced me as Dr. Thorne, the man with the golden hands, and told the story of the shipyard ambush as if it were an action movie, casting himself as the fearless leader and me as his loyal servant. I drank my wine and said nothing. I watched how the suppliers, Russians, I guessed by the accent, looked at Julian with a mix of fear and respect. I watched how Julian manipulated the conversation, alternating between charm and veiled threats. But mostly, I watched Julian's hands. He was drinking scotch, neat, and every time he lifted the glass, there was a tremor, a slight, barely perceptible shake in his fingers. He hit it well, setting the glass down quickly, keeping his hands clasped when not using them. But to a surgeon's eye, trained to notice the smallest deviation in motor control, it was a flashing neon sign. And his eyes, the pupils were slightly dilated, despite the bright lights. He was sick, or he was withdrawing. Dr. Thorne, the Russian leader, a man named Volkov, addressed me suddenly. Julian says you are a miracle worker. Is it true? I do my job, I said quietly. He's modest, Julian laughed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, painful. He saved my best man today. Pulled him out of the fire. Loyalty is rare, Volkov said, staring at me. Julian is lucky to have you. We are all lucky, Julian said, raising his glass. The tremor was there again. To partnerships. As they drank, I leaned in close to Julian, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Levodopa. I whispered. Julian froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He turned to me slowly, his eyes wide with genuine shock. What did you say? The tremor, I said, keeping my face impassive. The dilation. The slight rigidity in your neck when you turn. You're taking levodopa. Or something similar. Parkinson's? Or early onset neurodegeneration. Julian set his glass down. The sound was sharp against the table. You're imagining things, doctor. I'm a diagnostician, Julian, I murmured. I don't imagine. I observe. How long have you been hiding it? Does the board know? Does Silas know? Julian's face went pale. For the first time since I met him, he looked afraid. If the shareholders knew the CEO was sick, the stock would plummet. If his enemies knew he was physically weak, they would attack. Not a word, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. If you breathe a word of this. I know, I interrupted, taking a sip of my wine. My family pays the price. I remember the deal. I turned to look at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt powerful. But remember this, Julian, I said softly. I'm the only one in this room who knows how to manage the dosage so you don't shake during meetings. I'm the only one who can keep your secret from getting worse. So maybe you should treat your doctor with a little more respect. Julian stared at me. The dynamic at the table had shifted. He wasn't just the predator anymore. He was the patient. We'll talk later, he snapped, turning back to Volkov with a fake smile. The ride back to the estate was silent. Julian refused to look at me. I spent the time staring out the window, processing what I had just done. I had poked the bear. It was dangerous, reckless. But it bought me time. When we arrived, I went straight to the medical bay. I needed to see Silas. I needed to ground myself. The room was dark, lit only by the monitors. Silas was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs dangling over the side. He had managed to put on a t-shirt, though the effort must have been agonizing. "What are you doing?" I hissed, rushing over to him. "I told you to stay down." "I was coming to find you," Silas said. His voice was stronger now, fueled by adrenaline. "You were gone too long." I thought. "I'm fine," I said, gently pushing him back. Dinner was boring. Julian was charming. Nobody died. Silas grabbed my wrists. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Don't lie to me, Elias." I saw his face when he left. "He's up to something. He's using you." "I know," I said, looking down at our hands. "But I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to." Silas's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You're a doctor. You fix people. You're not supposed to be part of this, filth. I wanted you to stay away. I wanted you safe." "I'm not safe anywhere, Silas." I snapped, the stress finally breaking through. "Not anymore. I'm in it. I'm drowning in it." Silas pulled me closer, wincing as he shifted. He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my stomach. It was a gesture of surrender, of pure exhaustion. "I'll get you out," he muffled against my shirt. "I promise. As soon as I can walk. I'll get you out." I ran my hands through his hair, my heart aching. "You can't save me, Silas. Watch me." He looked up, his eyes burning. "Why didn't you leave me at the docks? You could have driven away. You could have been free." "You know why?" I whispered. "Say it," he challenged. "Tell me why you risked your life for a hired gun." I leaned down, my face inches from his. "Because you're the only thing in this house that isn't cold," I said. "And because I think I'd rather bleed out beside you than live safe without you." Silas let out a shuddering breath. He reached up, his hand cupping the back of my neck, pulling me down. This time, the kiss wasn't a question. It was an answer. It was desperate, tasting of fear and antiseptic and unspoken promises. It was the kind of kiss you give when you don't know if you'll live to see the morning. I lost myself in it, forgetting Julian, forgetting the photos, forgetting the tremor in my own hands. For a moment, there was only Silas. But then, reality crashed back in. I pulled away, breathless, my forehead resting against his. "You need to heal," I whispered. "That's your only job right now. Heal. Let me handle Julian." Silas looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "What did you do tonight, Elias? You look different." "I bought us some insurance," I said grimly. I stood up, smoothing down my shirt. "Get some sleep. I have work to do." "Elias." "Sleep, Silas." I walked out of the medical bay and headed straight for the main pharmacy storage. It was locked, biometric access only. My thumbprint opened it with a soft beep. I stepped inside the cool, sterile room. Shelves lined with everything from aspirin to Schedule 1 narcotics. I walked to the back, to the secure cabinet. I punched in the code Julian had given me on my first day. I didn't take morphine. I didn't take sedatives. My eyes scanned the labels until I found what I was looking for. Digitalis. Digoxin. A heart medication. In small doses, it regulated rhythm. In high doses, it caused cardiac arrest that looked exactly like a natural heart attack. And next to it, carbidopa-levodopa, the medication for Parkinson's. I took a vial of the Digitalis and a bottle of the levodopa. I slipped them into my pocket. Julian thought he had leverage because he knew where my family lived. He thought he was the only one playing chess. But he forgot one thing. He was the patient. I was the doctor. And in my world, the doctor decides who gets the medicine and who gets the poison. I walked back to my room, the glass vials clicking softly in my pocket. I took out the scalpel from the bedside table and set it next to the medicine. Sharp things are the only friends you have. "No, Silas," I whispered to the empty room. "Smart things are." I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang 3 times before a woman picked up. "Hello, Clara," I said, my voice steady. "Not Julian's fiancée. My sister. Listen to me very carefully. Don't ask questions. Pack a bag for you and Sophie. Tonight. Go to the cabin. The one nobody knows about. Elias? What's going on? You sound. Do it, Clara. Please. If you love me, do it." "Okay," she whispered, sensing the terror in my voice. "We're going. Don't turn on your phone. Don't use your credit cards. I'll come for you when it's safe." I hung up and removed the SIM card, snapping it in half. I took a deep breath. The leverage was gone. My family was moving. Now it was just me, Silas, and the devil in the Armani suit. And I was done playing by his rules. End of part 4. Part 5: The hand that holds the needle. The SIM card snapped with a satisfying crack between my fingers. I dropped the pieces into the biohazard waste bin in the corner of the medical bay, watching them disappear among the used gauze and sharps. It was done. My sister and niece were ghosts now, moving through backroads to a cabin that didn't exist on any digital map. Julian had lost his leverage, and in doing so, he had lost the only thing keeping me from destroying him. I turned back to the stainless steel tray on the counter. The 2 vials sat there like innocent little bottles of salvation. Levodopa. Digoxin. One could stabilize a dying man. The other could stop a heart in less than 3 minutes if administered intravenously. My hands were steady. Scarily steady. I realized then that the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, was a luxury for peacetime. And we were at war. You're planning something. The voice was low, raspy, and came from the shadows of the recovery bed. I didn't flinch. I continued filling a syringe with a precise mixture of saline and something else. I'm preparing a cocktail for our employer. He has a condition. He needs his medicine. Silas shifted on the bed. The rustle of sheets was followed by a grunt of pain. I turned to see him sitting up, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and sharp as flint. "Elias," he said, his voice hardening. "What did you put in that syringe?" "Insurance," I replied simply. I walked over to him, checking his bandages with a professional detachment I no longer felt. "How's the incision?" "Forget the incision," Silas growled, grabbing my wrist. His grip was weaker than usual, but the intent was there. "You sent your family away. I heard you on the phone. You destroyed your SIM card. You're going rogue." "I'm leveling the playing field," I corrected, looking down at his hand on my arm. I didn't pull away. Instead, I covered his hand with mine, feeling the heat of his skin, the pulse thumping against his wrist. Julian thinks he owns me because he knows my weak spots. I just removed them. Now I know his. He's sick, Silas realized, his eyes widening slightly. The tremor at dinner. Parkinson's. Early stages, aggressive. He's hiding it from the board, from his enemies, even from you. Especially from you. Because if the watchdog knows the master is weak, the watchdog might bite. Silas let out a breath, releasing my wrist. He ran a hand through his damp hair. If you expose him, he destroys you. If you poison him, his security team will tear this room apart before you can reach the exit. I'm not going to poison him, I lied smoothly. I'm just going to negotiate. Liar, Silas whispered. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. You're going to kill him. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I wasn't sure myself. You can't do this alone, Elias, Silas said, trying to swing his legs off the bed. Help me up. No. I pushed him back gently but firmly. You can barely stand. You tore your abdominal wall yesterday. If you fight, you bleed out. I can't save you twice, Silas. And I can't watch you walk into the lion's den with nothing but a needle, he shouted, the exertion making him wince. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from his. I'm not going in alone. I have you. You're the reason I'm doing this. Silas froze. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the electricity that had been building between us since that first night in the library. If I don't do this, I whispered, Julian will use you until you break. He'll throw you in front of every bullet, every knife, until there's nothing left but a tombstone. I won't let that happen. Elias, I love you, I said. The words tumbled out, reckless and terrified. I think I've loved you since you bled on my shoes and asked for whiskey. So stay here. Stay alive. Let me be the monster for once. Silas looked at me, his gray eyes shimmering. He reached up, cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. You're not a monster, document. You're just brave. Stupidly brave. He pulled me into a kiss, desperate, searing, a goodbye and a promise all wrapped in one. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring my fear and my resolve into him. When we broke apart, I felt a new kind of strength. Lock the door behind me, I said, stepping back. Don't open it for anyone but me. I grabbed the syringe and the vials, slipped them into my pocket, and walked out. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a held breath. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a heavy, humid stillness. I walked straight to Julian's office. I didn't knock. Julian was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. The room was dark, lit only by a single desk lamp. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. His right hand was resting on the desk, trembling violently. You're late, he snapped, not looking up. I told you to come an hour ago. I was busy, I said, closing the door behind me and locking it. The click echoed loudly in the room. Julian looked up then. He saw the lock. He saw my face. And for the first time, he saw that the doctor was gone. "Where is your sister, Elias?" he asked softly. "Gone," I said, walking toward the desk. "Fishing trip. No cell service." Julian laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "You think you're clever. You think hiding them makes you safe? I have resources you can't imagine. I can find them in a day." "Maybe," I said, stopping in front of the desk. "But you don't have a day, Julian. Look at your hand." He looked down. The tremor was getting worse. It was shaking the whole desk. "You missed your morning dose," I noted clinically. "And your afternoon one. The rigidity is setting in. Soon, you won't be able to hold a pen to sign a check. Or a gun." "Give me the medicine," Julian demanded, reaching out with his shaking hand. "Now." I pulled the vial of levodopa from my pocket. I held it up to the light. "This? It's a miracle drug. But the dosage, it's tricky. Too little, and you freeze. Too much, and you hallucinate. You lose your mind. What do you want?" Julian hissed. "Money. I offered you money." "I don't want your money," I said. "I want Silas." Julian blinked. "Silas? The dog. I want his contract voided. I want him free. And I want us both to walk out of here tonight with severance and without a tail." Julian stared at me for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a manic, unhinged sound. "You sentimental fool," he wheezed. "You think you can bargain for him? Silas belongs to me. He's my property. He's been mine since I pulled him out of the gutter 10 years ago. He doesn't know how to live without a leash. He's learning," I said coldly. "You're not going to give me the medicine," Julian realized, his eyes narrowing. "You're going to let me rot." "No," I said. "I'm going to give you a choice." I pulled out the syringe. "This contains a high dose of levodopa. Enough to stop the tremors for 12 hours. Enough to get you through your board meeting tomorrow." I placed the syringe on the desk. "But," I continued, leaning forward, "if you ever come near me or Silas or my family again, the next injection won't be medicine. It will be digoxin. And you know what that does." Julian stared at the syringe. He was sweating. His body was betraying him, craving the dopamine the drug provided. "You're bluffing," he sneered. "You're a healer. You took an oath." "I broke that oath the moment I walked into this room," I whispered. Julian lunged. It was faster than I expected from a sick man. He grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the desk and swung it. I ducked, but not fast enough. The glass grazed my temple, shattering against the bookshelf behind me. Pain exploded in my head, blinding and white-hot. I stumbled back, blood trickling into my eye. "Guards!" Julian screamed, pressing a panic button under his desk. "Security! To the office! Now!" The room was instantly bathed in flashing red light. An alarm began to blare throughout the house. "You idiot!" Julian snarled, standing up, the decanter neck still in his hand like a jagged knife. "You think you can threaten me in my own house? I'll have you gutted." He advanced on me. I was dizzy, backing away until I hit the wall. I fumbled for the scalpel in my pocket, Silas's gift, but my hands were slippery with sweat. The door behind me rattled. "Locked." "No one is coming to save you," Julian said, raising the jagged glass. "Silas is a cripple, and my men are loyal to the paycheck." I braced myself, raising my arms to protect my face. Crash. The heavy oak door didn't open. It splintered inward. A figure burst through the wreckage of the lock. He wasn't moving with grace. He was moving with pure brute force. Silas. He was pale as a sheet, clutching his side with one hand, a stolen security pistol in the other. He looked like death warmed over, but to me, he was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Step away from him," Silas roared. The sound wasn't human. It was the growl of a wounded animal protecting its mate. Julian froze. He looked at Silas, then at the gun. "You traitor. I made you. And now I'm unmaking you," Silas retorted. He didn't aim at Julian. He aimed at the syringe on the desk. Bang. The shot was deafening in the small room. The syringe shattered, liquid spraying everywhere. "There goes your medicine," Silas rasped, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Now you have a choice, Julian. You can let us walk out, or you can shake to death right here." Julian stared at the shattered glass. His lifeline was gone. He looked at his hand, which was vibrating uncontrollably now. Panic, raw and primal, took over his face. "Get out," he whispered. "Get out." "Not yet," Silas said. He turned his gaze to me. "Can you walk?" I nodded, wiping the blood from my eye. "I'm fine." "Grab the files," Silas ordered, nodding toward the safe behind the desk. "The black ledger. We need leverage to keep him quiet." "Silas, no." Julian screamed, lunging for the safe. Silas fired again. This time, the bullet hit the floor inches from Julian's foot. Julian scrambled back, falling into his chair. "Don't test me, boss," Silas said, his voice straining with pain. "I'm off the clock." I ran to the safe. It was open. Julian had been in a rush. I grabbed the black ledger Silas mentioned, stuffing it into my shirt. "Let's go," I said, grabbing Silas's arm. He was burning up, his weight leaning heavily on me. "The guards are coming," Silas gritted out as we stumbled into the hallway. "Main entrance is blocked. We have to go through the garage. Can you make it?" I asked, supporting him. "For you." Silas looked at me, a pained, bloody smile on his lips. "I'd crawl." We moved as fast as we could. The alarm was still blaring, a chaotic soundtrack to our escape. We could hear footsteps pounding on the stairs above us, heavy boots, tactical gear. "Down here." Silas shoved me toward the servants' stairwell. We practically fell down the stairs, shoulder to shoulder. My head was throbbing. Silas was bleeding through his bandage again, but we were moving. We burst into the garage. It was a cavernous space filled with luxury cars. "Take the Porsche," Silas ordered, pointing to a sleek silver car. "It's faster than the SUVs." I fumbled for the keys on the valet board. Found them. "Freeze." The shout came from the garage entrance. 3 security guards stood there, weapons raised. "Drop the gun, Silas," one of them yelled. "Don't be stupid." Silas didn't drop the gun. He pushed me behind the car. "Get in, Elias," he whispered. "Start the engine." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to buy you time." "No." I grabbed his arm. "We go together, or we don't go." "Elias, look at me," Silas said. His face was gray, his eyes losing focus. "I can't run. I'm slowing you down." "Then we fight," I said, pulling the scalpel from my pocket. It looked ridiculous against the assault rifles, but I didn't care. Sharp things, remember? Silas looked at the scalpel, then at me. A look of profound wonder crossed his face. "You crazy bastard," he breathed. He raised his gun, but he didn't fire at the guards. He fired at the fire suppression system on the ceiling. Bang! Bang! The pipes burst. White chemical foam and water sprayed down in a torrential curtain, instantly reducing visibility to 0. The guards shouted, confused, firing blindly into the mist. "Now!" Silas roared. He threw himself into the passenger seat as I dove behind the wheel. I slammed the key in, the engine roaring to life like a beast. Bullets pinged off the chassis as I floored the accelerator. I didn't aim for the exit ramp. I aimed for the garage door itself. "Hold on!" I screamed. The Porsche hit the reinforced metal door at 60 miles per hour. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and for a second, we were flying. We landed on the wet asphalt of the driveway, spinning out, tires screeching. I regained control, heart hammering in my throat, and gunned it toward the main gate. "We made it," I gasped, looking over at Silas. Silas was slumped against the door. The gun had fallen from his hand. His shirt was soaked in red. "Silas." He didn't answer. "Silas." I reached over, shaking him. His head lolled to the side, his eyes closed. "No, no, no," I begged, tears blurring my vision as I drove into the night. "Don't you dare die on me. Not now. We're free." "Silas." The only answer was the roar of the engine and the shallow, ragged sound of his breathing fading into the darkness. End of Part 5. Part 6. The Heartbeat of Freedom. The Porsche was a silver bullet tearing through the throat of the night, but inside, the air smelled of iron and impending death. "Stay with me," I shouted, my voice raw against the roar of the engine. "Silas, do not close your eyes." Beside me, Silas was a fading ghost. His head rolled loosely against the leather seat, his skin the color of ash. The hastily applied pressure bandage on his side was soaked through, a dark, spreading stain that looked black under the passing streetlights. "Cold," he murmured, his teeth chattering. "Elias, cold." "I know." I choked out, cranking the heater to the max. "I know, baby. Just hold on. 10 minutes. Just give me 10 minutes. I didn't have 10 minutes. I knew the physiology of blood loss. I knew the signs of hypovolemic shock. His heart was pumping sludge, struggling to keep his brain oxygenated. If I didn't stop the bleeding and replace the volume, he would cardiac arrest before I could even find a safe place to park. I needed a miracle. Or failing that, I needed a place with bright lights and no questions. I remembered a location from my residency days, a 24-hour veterinary clinic on the outskirts of the city, run by an old friend, Marcus, who owed me for keeping his addiction off the record years ago. It wasn't a hospital, but it had sterile fields, anesthesia, and surgical tools. I drifted the car around a sharp corner, tires screaming in protest, and slammed on the brakes in front of a nondescript brick building. The open neon sign flickered in the rain. I didn't wait. I killed the engine, jumped out, and ran to the passenger side. Silas was dead weight. I hauled him out, his arm draped over my shoulder, his massive frame nearly crushing me. But adrenaline is a powerful drug. I half carried, half dragged him to the glass doors and kicked them until the lock rattled. "Marcus!" I screamed, pounding on the glass. "Open the damn door." A light flicked on inside. A frantic face appeared, Marcus, older, grayer. He saw me, saw the blood, and unlocked the door instantly. "Elias? What the hell?" "No questions," I panted, dragging Silas into the lobby. "Trauma room. Now. I need saline. I need O-negative if you have canine substitute. Don't look at me like that. Just get me fluids. And I need a surgical kit." Marcus stared for a split second. Then the doctor in him took over. "Room 2. I'll get the fluids." We got Silas onto the metal table. He groaned, a low, guttural sound that tore at my heart. "I'm sorry," I whispered, cutting his soaked shirt open with a pair of shears Marcus handed me. "I'm so sorry, Silas." The wound was catastrophic. The bullet from the garage hadn't hit him, but the impact of the car crash had torn the previous sutures and ripped the underlying muscle. He was bleeding internally. "His BP is crashing," Marcus said, hooking up a monitor. "Elias, he's barely holding on." "He's not dying," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Scrub in. You're assisting." "I'm a vet, Elias. I treat dogs. Anatomy is anatomy when you're sewing up a hole," I snapped. "Gloves. Now." For the next 2 hours, the world shrank to the size of that surgical field. I wasn't Elias the lover, or Elias the victim. I was Dr. Thorne. My hands, usually so gentle, moved with ruthless efficiency. I clamped arteries, I tied off veins, I irrigated the wound with saline until the water ran clear. Silas flatlined once. The high-pitched whine of the monitor cut through the room like a knife. "No," I shouted. I dropped the scalpel and started compressions. "Don't you dare. Come back. Pump. 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 Push AP." I ordered Marcus. "Elias, he's gone. Push the damn epinephrine." I hammered on his chest, breaking a rib. I didn't care. I needed his heart to beat. I needed the man who had bought me a scalpel, the man who had called me Little Pear in a fever dream, to come back to me. "Silas!" I screamed, my tears finally falling, mixing with the sweat and blood on his chest. "Come back." Beep. A pause. Beep, beep. The rhythm returned, weak, thready, but there. I collapsed against the table, gasping for air. "He's back. He's back." We finished the surgery in silence. I stitched him up, 3 layers of sutures, neat and tight. I cleaned him. I covered him with heated blankets. When it was done, I sat on the floor of the veterinary clinic, leaning against the metal table, holding Silas's limp hand. My scrubs were ruined. My hands were stained red, but his chest was rising and falling. He was alive. Silas woke up 2 days later. We had moved to a motel 3 towns over, a rundown place with peeling wallpaper and a flickering TV, but it was off the grid. Marcus had given us antibiotics and painkillers, enough to last a week. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the parking lot through the blinds, the stolen black ledger on my lap. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. I had spent every waking moment waiting for the inevitable fever or infection. But Silas was a tank. "Water," the rasp came from the bed. I was there in a heartbeat, a plastic cup with a straw at his lips. He drank greedily, his eyes squeezed shut. When he finished, he opened them. They were clear. Gray like storm clouds, but clear. "Elias," he whispered. "I'm here," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I brushed the hair back from his forehead. "You're okay. We're okay." He looked around the room, confused. "Where?" "Motel. Route 9. We're safe." He looked down at his chest, at the fresh bandages. Then he looked at me. His gaze traveled over my face, noting the dark circles under my eyes, the exhaustion etched into my skin. "You look terrible," he murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I laughed, a wet, choked sound. "You should look in a mirror. You died on me, Silas. You actually died for a minute." His expression turned serious. He reached out, his hand trembling, and covered mine. "I heard you." "Heard what?" "Calling me back. You were loud." I squeezed his hand, pressing it to my cheek. "I wasn't ready to let you go. I'm still not." Silas sighed, a sound of pure contentment. "Did we get it?" "The ledger." I picked up the black book from the nightstand. "Right here. It's everything, Silas. Money laundering, bribes, hits, even the medical records he hid. It's enough to put Julian away for life. Or enough to make sure he never looks for us again. Silas closed his eyes. He'll come. He won't stop. He will, I said, my voice hardening. Because I'm about to make the call. Silas's eyes snapped open. Elias, no. It's too dangerous. Trust me, I said. I'm not the same doctor you met in the library. I stood up and walked to the door. Rest. I'll be right back. I stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The stars were out. I dialed the number I had memorized, Julian's private line. It rang 4 times. Who is this? Julian's voice was weak, shaky. The lack of medication was taking its toll. Hello, Julian, I said calmly. How's the tremor? Silence. Heavy and suffocating. Elias, he breathed. It sounded like a curse. You stole my car. You stole my property. I freed your property, I corrected. And I have your book. Bring it back, Julian rasped. Bring it back, and I won't kill your sister. My sister is in a jurisdiction you can't touch. I lied, or maybe it wasn't a lie anymore. And if you send anyone after her, or us, I send this book to the FBI, the press, and your Russian friends at the docks. I imagine Volkov won't be happy to know you've been skimming off his shipments. It's all in here, page 42. I heard Julian's breath hitch. He knew I had him. What do you want? He asked, defeated. I want you to forget us, I said. I want Silas's employment contract terminated. I want a severance package of $5 million transferred to an offshore account by morning. Call it back pay for the bullets he took for you. And then I want you to never, ever say our names again. And if I refuse, then I upload the files, I said. And I stop sending you the formula for your medication cocktail. You'll be shaking in a prison cell within a week, withdrawing and helpless. The silence stretched for a long minute. I could hear the wheels turning in his sick, desperate mind. He had no leverage. He had no health. He had nothing. Fine, Julian whispered. Account number? I gave it to him. Don't come back, Elias, Julian said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old venom. If I see you in this city again. You won't, I said. Goodbye, Julian. I hung up. I pulled the SIM card out and snapped it, tossing it into the darkness. It was over. 6 months later. The ocean breeze was different from the rain in the city. It smelled of salt and freedom. I sat on the deck of the beach house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A glass of wine sat on the table next to a bowl of fresh fruit. The screen door creaked open. Silas walked out. He was moving well now. The limp was almost gone, just a slight stiffness when the weather turned cold. He was wearing shorts and a loose linen shirt, the kind of clothes the old Silas would have laughed at. He didn't look like a bodyguard anymore. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy weight. You're thinking again, he said, coming up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, burying his face in my neck. His beard scratched my skin, a sensation I had grown to love. Just reflecting, I said, leaning back into him. It's quiet here. Too quiet, he asked, kissing my ear. Do you miss the adrenaline, doctor? I smiled, turning in his arms to face him. I ran my hands down his chest, feeling the thick ridge of scar tissue under his shirt, the mark of where I had stitched him back together. I miss the surgery, I admitted, but I don't miss the fear. I like this. I like us. Silas hummed, pulling me closer. I like us too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a ring. It was the silver scalpel. He had it polished, the engraving shining in the sunset light. You kept it, I said, surprised. Sharp things are friends, Silas quoted softly. But you were right, Elias. Smart things are better. He placed the scalpel on the table, next to the wine. Then he took my hand and placed it over his heart. It was beating strong and steady, a rhythm I had fought hell and high water to preserve. This is yours, he whispered. You saved it. You own it. I don't want to own you, Silas, I said, looking into those gray eyes that were no longer guarded. I just want to be with you. Then be with me, he said. Right here. Now. He kissed me, slow and deep, with the taste of salt and wine on his tongue. It wasn't a desperate kiss in a getaway car, or a goodbye kiss in a hospital room. It was a promise